Except for when it has something to say about stamp prices, you don't hear much about the Postal Regulatory Commission. In reality, it's an active organization and just out with its annual report covering the 2023 fiscal year, the year after 2022 Postal Service Reform Act. Here with a review, PRC Chairman Michael Kubayanda. Mr. Kubayanda, good to have you with us.
Hello, Tom.
And Commissioner Ashley Poling. Ms. Poling, good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate you having us on.
And let's start with a little civics maybe at the beginning, because Postal Service and postal delivery is something of a complicated apparatus. The Postal Regulatory Commission that you are on is not the Postal Board of Governors, and it's not the U.S. Postal Service. So tell us what you do and the scope of PRC activities.
Sure, Tom. The PRC is a small federal agency. We have about 90 employees, and our mission is to provide transparency and accountability of the U.S. Postal Service. The relationship is similar to, say, utility regulation. So think of an electricity provider or an energy provider and how the local Public Utility Commission oversees that provider. That's a little bit of the model for the creation of the Postal Service and the Postal Regulatory Commission through a 1970 law known as the Postal Reorganization Act. The PRC was created as the Postal Rate Commission in that 1970 law and then renamed the Postal Regulatory Commission in the 2006 Postal Reform Law that gave the Commission some expanded powers as well. The main thing that the Commission does is approve Postal Service requests for price changes, and we determine whether those price changes are consistent with the law and our regulations. And I can go into that a little bit more if you'd like.
Yeah, the details probably get into deep statute and into case history and so forth. But
absolutely.
Ms. Poling, how do you stay clear of the Postal Board of Governors?
You know, Tom, we were just chatting a little bit before about just sort of the misconceptions, I think, out there regarding like the different roles of the Postal Regulatory Commission and the board. You know, you were even asking me, I think, about sort of the position and if it's full-time, and there are 5 of us here at the commission. We're not allowed to have more than 3 folks from one political party. Currently, we have 2 Democrats, 1 independent, and 2 Republicans, actually. But yeah, it's a full-time job, and I will tell you this, the Postal Service sure keeps us busy. We did have a new rate system that went into effect in 2021. And since then, you know, the Postal Service has been filing rate increases twice a year. We've been staying on our toes. I think also with the pandemic, I always hesitate saying this because obviously COVID was so terrible in so many ways for so many people in our country. But I do think it gave a real appreciation for postal workers and how much they contribute every day to our daily lives. But I think that time really revealed that. And so I think with all that going on, I think, you know, things like the Postal Service Reform Act, you know, it kind of helped give momentum, I think, for that getting passed and people actually understanding just how vital this agency is and how incredible these workers are. And, you know, I think with that, it's kept us busy in the way of, you know, you've probably heard of these nature of service cases as well. The Postal Service did lengthen service standards a few years ago. We participate through the advisory opinion process, which is when there's a nationwide or substantially nationwide change in service. So just a few highlights, but I think, you know, that's really how they're keeping us busy.
And the idea of rates, and you do a lot more than just simply look at rates and have final say over those, but that's a difficult question because the Postal Service does lose money and, you know, there's been a lot of effort to try to close that gap. You could say, well, let's make first class $1,000 and then we'd be in the clover. Of course, nobody would mail anything. So I imagine it's a pretty complicated, more than it seems, to say whether 61, 62, 63 cents, there is a, what do they call it in economics, elasticity of demand connected to pricing.
That is absolutely a major issue, and that is one of the major issues that we're tasked with taking a look at. So Congress created an approach for the Postal Service pricing. There's 2 broad categories of Postal Service products, what we call market dominant. Those are products where the Postal Service is either the sole provider or dominates the market, primary provider, as compared to product areas where the Postal Service has a lot of competitors. You can think of, say, parcel products as an example of that. In the competitive space, we have relatively light regulation, and what the Commission does is look at primarily whether the Postal Service is covering its costs and think of the ideas that they're not unfairly underpricing those products. And the idea there is that the market provides some kind of protection for consumers to a certain extent. On the market dominant side, this is where the Postal Service is either the sole provider, it has a legal monopoly, or it dominates the space. There are stricter regulations. And Congress created an approach in which we have to balance several objectives and factors that govern whether postal prices are legal or not. So it's a balancing act. And then what the Commission does is issue regulations to implement those objectives and factors and help guide the implementation of those rates. So you are correct. There's a lot of competing issues, elasticities, price elasticity of demand is one of those complicated issues.
We're speaking with Michael Kubayanda. He's chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission, and with Commissioner Ashley Poling. And you are out with a new strategic plan and also a new review of 2023 for the Commission itself. What are the top issues? I mean, what are you trying to accomplish in the year ahead in the master plan that goes out to 2028, I believe?
Yes, we do have a relatively new strategic plan through 2028. Like most agencies, we develop overall strategies to help guide our work over a 5-year period. We believe that a new strategy is important because, as Commissioner Poling pointed out, COVID really revealed how critical the mailing system is to the nation. The Postal Service played a critical role in distributing COVID test kits, and no one else has a network that reaches every American in the fashion that the Postal Service does. So that really highlighted the criticality of the postal system, the importance of postal workers who do an amazing job on a day-to-day basis. But as you also noted, the industry is undergoing some really difficult changes. We've seen a large decline in mail volume. In 2006, mail volume peaked at 213 billion pieces of mail. It is now below 120 billion pieces of mail annually. So you can see really large changes. We've also discussed already a change in pricing strategy from the Postal Service in terms of raising prices twice a year. So that's been a change. And all these issues have led to some stakeholder concerns and more demands on the Commission, which Commissioner Poling has also referred to. So we wanted to develop a new strategy to sort of address all these issues, make sure that we're on top of the changes that are going on in the industry and address the concerns that policymakers and stakeholders have.
And I think, Tom, if I might, I think engagement is a really big part of that strategic plan, and I'm really excited about all the ways we're doing that. I already mentioned COVID, but of course, another impact that had was in us not being able to meet with folks from the industry quite as much in person, obviously. And so it was really exciting, I thought, for us last year, because it's the most meetings I can recall since being a commissioner here, which I came onto the commission in 2019. The most meetings I think we've ever had with stakeholders was in 2023. And it was so important for us to hear from them about the Postal Service and how pricing strategies were affecting them, how service issues were affecting them. And I think that really shapes, how we are able to respond to things. And just to kind of tag on to a few things, obviously our annual report is really covering kind of all of the things we did in FY 2023, but I think it's also important to talk about sort of how that kind of sets us up for this year as well in 2024. So sort of with that being such a busy year, it's also important to note, you might have seen, we opened a public inquiry docket on the Delivering for America plan. We did that in April of 2023. That really allows us to kind of explore the scope of what's going on there and to be able to ask the Postal Service questions. There's obviously been a lot of concern, I think, when it comes particularly to service issues. So that is sort of a unique, I know we've talked a lot about rates, which is a huge part of what we do, but we really do also play an incredible role when it comes to service transparency and accountability. And that's sort of one of the ways we're doing that. Not to leave out rates again, but to say one other thing we are doing, we heard a lot from stakeholders, as I mentioned, in these meetings and various venues throughout the year. We also have a very extensive comment process, and that's how people can file in our docketing system. But, I think hearing a lot about what was going on, what their concerns were, and we were due to do a 5-year sort of review of the market dominant rate making system in light of sort of, developments and also really hearing from these stakeholders. We've since moved that up and we'll be opening that up earlier. So I think engagement is just critical, I think, for the work that we do. It plays out in all kinds of ways, whether we're going to a conference or speaking at an event or whatever it might be. But it's incredibly important for us to know what's going on in the community and for them to feel, I think, connected to us.
And how are relations with the executive branch of the Postal Service itself? Do you meet in person regularly? Is it like a food fight, or is it pretty cordial?
I think that's an excellent question. We do, and I know, and let's not, there is, I guess, the elephant in the room is you see a lot of times, these articles and talking about this, maybe we're at odds with each other or whatever else. I think it's really important to remember that, regulated entities don't often love their regulator, and I think that's fine.